Dr. Lance Rich here, second lecture of 3 on endocrine system, and this lecture is all about functions, and I'm going to give you some examples of systems of homeostasis and also brain endocrine function, and then I'm going to talk about pathways more generally. All right, so let me just give you I think I have two homeostatic functions. One is about calcium, and another is about sugar. And I like this type. I mean, I'm not going to go through all the details of it, but I will say, first thing you should know is why calcium homeostasis is important. The second is that you should understand that there are two hormones that are involved in calcium homeostasis. One of those hormones is produced in the parathyroid gland, and the other is then produced in the thyroid gland, and these two glands are right next to each other. And one of them actually responds to high calcium concentrations, and the other one responds to low calcium concentrations. And what is the response? Well, the response is to restore the calcium concentrations to their normal level, right? And this is how it's done. Calcium receptors. There are calcium receptors in both glands. How do they work? And I'm going to give you a link here. It's actually pretty nice. I will say this, that the calcium receptors are calcium sensing receptors that will sense the presence of calcium in the bloodstream. And if it's the parathyroid, like low calcium concentrations, will trigger what? Well, the release of parathyroid hormone. So what are these calcium sensing receptors actually doing that will inhibit the production of parathyroid hormone in normal conditions? And then likewise, what's happening in the thyroid gland? Some of the things that happen, this is like a pathway, right? It's like, okay, so if you got elevated or reduced calcium concentrations, what's happening in the different parts of the body to restore the conditions? One of those things is vitamin D is activated by the parathyroid hormone, increases calcium absorption in the small intestine to help bring calcium concentrations back to the normal range. So this is a good system. Again, this test is open book, so hopefully, you dig into this, spend some time with it, so you don't have to spend too much time with it on the exam. Next slide. Glucose homeostasis. Well, okay, so we know glucose is a fuel. We also know it's stored in the liver, and it's managed in fairly narrow range by the body. Too little, too much generates syndromes, one of which is diabetes. And so hormones involved are two, like in the case of calcium homeostasis. Insulin, when glucose levels are too high, produced in the pancreas, and glucagon, when insulin level and sugar levels are too low. There are specialized kinds of cells in the pancreas, which I might ask you about, and this is the way it works, right? Again, this should be no surprise when I say this is a negative feedback system, right? Too little glucose, something kicks in to restore the glucose levels to normal osmolarity or concentrations. Diabetes 1 and 2. Diabetes 2 is more common in people, especially who are obese. Still, I suppose, an open question as to whether obesity causes type 2 or type 2 is caused by obesity, or obesity causes type 2 or type 2 causes obesity. Anyways, so this is the second homeostatic system that involves the endocrine system, and I want you to be able to use this, make sense of it. Now, let's move on to other glands. It's moving away from homeostasis. There are 3 glands in the the brain that are classified as endocrine glands, pineal gland, the pituitary, which has posterior and anterior components, and then the hypothalamus. This is the pineal gland's role. It produces a compound called melatonin. Melatonin is associated with biological rhythms and sleep. Signals from the retina are fed to the hypothalamus, which then communicates with the pineal gland, which then releases melatonin. So this actually involves both the endocrine system and the nervous system and the circuitry. Hypothalamus. So I asked a question on the handout, why is the hypothalamus thought of as master gland? And here are some answers to that question. I do not imagine that this is not something to be thought of objectively. It's really about revealing some of the controlling roles that the hypothalamus plays in the communication system of the endocrine glands. And it also is important to remember this, that the hypothalamus is actually communicating directly with the brain and with the endocrine system. So that's one of the reasons why people think of it as a master gland. Involved in many homeostatic functions through the releasing and inhibitory factors, regulates many pituitary functions, which is the organ that's associated with the hypothalamus, and then it also produces its own hormones, ADH, antidiuretic hormone, and oxytocin, which are stored in the pituitary, posterior pituitary. You are not responsible for the details of those functions unless I show them to you, which I do. So I think this is a good table. I'll probably ask you a question about this stuff, right? So you got to be able to use this information. This is hypothalamus pituitary gland connections. So the hypothalamus produces hormones. Some of them inhibitory, some of them are releasing factors or excitatory. That is, they will then cause changes in the pituitary, and the pituitary gland will then produce hormones, in many cases, that will actually then move on to other hormones or other endocrine glands, other tissues to affect their operation. So this is a good table. I like this one. I made it my own. Moving on. So I want to finish off this slideshow with generalizations about pathways. The simple endocrine pathways and neuroendocrine pathways. I'm going to leave this one alone for you to think about, but I am going to focus attention on this presentation on this one. This is the most general one, the one that I will probably focus on the test. So you got a stimulus, and the stimulus could be nervous system stimulus. It could be another hormone arriving stimulus. Could be chemical stimulus like calcium. Could be glucose. And then you got the endocrine cells that are associated with the gland producing something, like in the case of the small intestine producing secretin, a hormone that then goes into the blood circulatory system and then arrives at target cells. Those target cells are here in this case pancreas, and they are going to be specific target cells that have receptors on them or that have proteins within the cytoplasm that the endocrine hormone will bind to, and then will affect function of that target cell. And the response then will generate as an outcome a negative feedback, which will shut down the stimulus and then shut down the production of the hormone. So that's the kind of stereotypical simple pathway in a negative feedback system involving the endocrine hormones, endocrine glands. This is a little bit more complex one. So you'll see here you got the hypothalamus, pituitary and hypothalamus are connected to each other. The hypothalamus feeds the gonadotropic releasing hormone, gonadotropin releasing hormone into the pituitary. Pituitary then releases two hormones, follicle stimulating and luteinizing hormones that then arrive via the bloodstream in the testes in this case, or it could be ovaries of a female, and then the testes, in this case, produce testosterone. Female ovaries would produce testosterone, but that would be converted pretty quickly into mostly estrogen. And then there's a feedback that will generate a cessation or a shutdown of the testosterone production if too much of it is available. So this is a more complex pathway, one that you should remember. Well, remember, at least understand. Okay. And this one is just I don't know, I'll leave it there. You can look at it. It's a good one. I will say this, that it involves both the um, um, endocrine system and the nervous system, and you should be able to see how. You should also understand that we've got two kinds of stress. We got short-term stress, you got long-term stress, and one involves epinephrine and norepinephrine, and the other one involves cortisol. And I think that's good enough for now. Just know that you'll probably see something on the exam that will have you tap into the content of this slide. Okay, that's it for this slideshow. Thank you.